Today we're going to do a step-by-step tutorial on a side profile of this handsome gentleman. I'm going to show you real quick the basics of kind of blocking in the shapes. So if you look at the image, we can see that the back part of his skull is a pretty basic circle. So we're going to start with a circle on our page. The front of his jawline and his nose creates a square, kind of like this. And then the tilt of his glasses goes almost right through the middle of that circle and kind of defines where the ears should be placed as well. I would recommend that you click the link to the source image below and either print it out. It's okay if it's black and white because we're going to be reproducing this in black and white as well. Or have a separate device like an iPad or a separate computer screen where you can see the image as you're following along with the tutorial. All right, let's get started. Okay. Got an eraser. I'm going to use a 6B pencil. And I'm using this as my lightest pencil, so obviously 6B is really dark. We're going to use it as what you would use like an HB, like a really hard lead pencil. The reason I'm using a 6B is just so that you guys can see it better. And then I'm going to use a pen, just a basic ballpoint pen, as my darkest pencil. You guys can certainly use pen or pencil or whatever medium you'd like to use. Basically, the idea of this tutorial is just working on basic faces. Okay, we're going to start with the circle. The circle is going to represent the back part of his skull. As you can see here, I've broken down the image into some basic shapes that will help you to get the proportions right. So let me darken that in just a little bit more. Once you do that lighter first pass, it's easier to get your circle the right shape. And it can have some messy lines here. It's just the beginning stages. About halfway, put a little point in the middle of our circle. Okay, so we're going to have this box. This is going to represent the front of his face. I'm going to make it a little wider here. And it really just goes slightly lower than the bottom of the circle. So there it is, right there. Okay, now we can put this in here like this, though it's not necessarily important. Okay. And then the next line we have is a line that goes kind of from here straight through the circle like that. Okay, so that's going to show us where the tip of the ear is, where the top of his sunglasses are. And then we can see that the bottom of his sunglasses go down below the square. His nose, mouth, chin. And then we'll just get his neck in here. Like that. And then on the back, his neck starts lower than that line, right about there. He's got a little wrinkle there. Okay, let's put in the nose and the mouth. His nose is kind of curved outward. Okay, and it comes to a bit of a point and then kind of scoops back in. But it really will be helpful for you to be able to see both the source image and what I'm working on here. So you can kind of see how I'm using that reference and recreate it on your own paper. Okay, his chin goes pretty much down to the edge of that box. And it's almost perfectly straight across until it gets to here, and then there's kind of some shadows in there to curve up. Let's do his ear next. So his ear stops. You go halfway to the midpoint of the box and then slightly lower. That's kind of where the tip of his ear is, the bottom tip. And then it curves out and it sits right about here on the edge of that line. Just like that. We can add a few more little details in here. I find that the eye usually can determine what an ear is based on the location on the face and also just based on the shape of it. So you don't really have to put a lot of detail. It doesn't have to be perfect in order for the eye to say, oh, that's an ear. And a lot of times we don't recognize people by their ears. It's more about the shape of their nose, their lips, their profile, their eyes. So why waste too much time on the ear? Okay, let's look at those sunglasses, which start at the top of this line. They kind of follow that circle, the shape of the circle, down to his nose. Kind of like that. Then they curve around, go straight back up, kind of like that. Okay, and then gosh, I'm blanking on what this is. The part that goes around your ear follows that line perfectly. That's kind of what the inspiration for the line was. The thicker part of this kind of goes to the top of the square and then up a little. And then the back part kind of sits behind his ear like that. The eye in this image is quite simple. The bottom of it's kind of at the top of that square, goes straight across. And then his top eyelid comes like that. There's quite a bit of shadow in here, so it's hard to see exactly what's going on. But if we can get this basic shape in here, we can go in later and add more detail. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is define his head a little better. As you can see, I'm gonna pull this image up again. The back of his head follows that circle really closely, but the top gets a little bit flatter. So, just going to flatten this part out a little bit. And then bring it back around down here. Okay, next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through and erase all of the lines that I don't need. And then I'm gonna go back in with my pen and start darkening everything up. This part I'm gonna speed up so the video is not super long, but if you need to pause the video so you can get this done, go for it. Okay, now I'm going to take this pen, and remember I'm representing your darker or your sharper details You're welcome to use a pen or you can use a pencil. Really, there is no rules about what tools you have to use to create art, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. Get rid of some of these. You'll also notice I kind of sketched in his shoulders and his collar here. Not too worried about this part. I'm really worried about focusing on getting this nice and clean. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start adding details to the nose, the nostrils, and the lips. And really all it is looking at your image. We're deciding what needs to be darker, what needs to be defined, and what doesn't. And then his nostrils kind of rounded, kind of like that. And then the back curve of his nostril kind of curves up and it almost touches the glasses. This part in here is much darker, so we're just going to darken it in. Now I might make some mistakes with my pen, and that's one highlight to using a pencil. You can always go back in and erase them. But I'm using the pen, as I said, to help you guys see the details here. Okay. I'm going to ignore his facial hair for now, just so we can work on the actual shapes here. Middle of his lips, right there where the two lips connect, is another darker spot. So I'm just going to kind of create a shape, like a triangular shape right in there. So right now I'm really just going through and outlining the face. I like his bottom lip. It kind of comes flat out and then curves around. He's definitely got some character going on here. And his chin is very square. Pretty much straight down. Obviously there's some natural curve to it, but it's definitely a very square jawline. Okay, I'm going to stop that line right there because this isn't exactly a solid line. It's more like a shadow. His Adam's apple into his neck and shoulders. Okay. Now with the pen, I'm going to use some different shading techniques, mostly cross-hatching. You can, as you're using a pencil, you can shade more softly, but if you decide to use a pen, you might consider doing something kind of like this to add some detail and shadow without solid lines. So basically I'm just putting lines together. It's called hatching, and then cross-hatching would be if I'm doing lines like this and then doing lines like this over top of them. I'm going to do the same thing up here for his nostril. Just kind of darken in that to define it. And also on his top lip, because it's darker right there. A lot of times with hatching, if you kind of follow, you can either go straight across, but you could also kind of follow the line of the curvature of his lip, which would add some interest as well. Let's go in and do his ear. So we're just kind of going back over, adding more details, correcting the details that we did add that we think need a little change. And then adding those shadows. The shadows are what's going to really make it start to look more lifelike. I also think that the character of your line will add interest and create more of a stylized image. So instead of a hatched shadow, you could always just do a solid line that's a little bit darker or thicker, and that's going to give you some more character as well. I'm definitely going to use that technique in here to define his inner ear. So you can see I'm going to just kind of thicken in some of these lines, make them suggest a lot more shadow in there than we had before. And then combining some other techniques, some hatching in there to add a little more shadow. Okay, again, we're not going to stress on the ear too much. It's not one of the qualities in a face that really creates recognition. Top of the glasses, remember the glass line kind of follows the curve of the skull, or the head of that circle that we had there, and then down to here, down to right above the curve of his nose. It looks like we've got kind of a section right here where the lens hits the other part of the glass. I'm still blanking on what that actually is called. I think I'd be able to remember words. Okay, and then it looks like this part is kind of its own section on the frame. Adding all of these, so I'm darkening in this section, adding all of the little tiny details is really what's going to create the character. There's a good shadow right in here. That's kind of fun. Let's get that in there. The frame of the glass kind of swoops around like that. Connects, looks like it connects right here. Things around like that. Let's darken in his eye, and it looks like actually in my drawing I didn't bring the eye up quite high enough. It looks like the eyelashes kind of go right up to right below this little connection of the glasses to the what would be called the frame. Still thinking of what that's called. Okay, and then his eyelid is really just right up in there. Pretty shadowed by the glasses themselves. Okay, eyelashes here. And especially for men, I think if you just do a solid darker line, it gives the impression of eyelashes without being super feminine. Which definitely helps. Okay, so I'm just kind of redefining that eye a little better. And then this whole section is really quite dark. I don't think there's any highlight. I would assume he has a dark brown eyes to start with, but then they're also shadowed by the glasses. So we're just going to do that. And kind of bring in his bottom, the bottom of his eye there. Now, the darkest part of his face is right here in the shadow of those eyeglasses. So we're just going to gently go in there and just shade. Now when you do cross hatching, the farther apart you go, the lighter it looks. And the closer together those lines are, the darker it's going to be. So we're just going to spread those lines closer where we want it to be darker. And then as it comes out, another fun technique, which you could use, is just kind of scribbling, gently scribbling. You know, obviously we're talking about these techniques because I'm using a pen, and you can do them with a pencil as well, but pens don't blend like pencils do, right? So you have to get a little more creative here. We're going to darken this in a little bit more. There. Okay, let's define the top of his head here. And it's not a perfect line either. He's got some little divots and bumps, just like everybody's skull is not a perfect circle. Okay, down to this little roll on the back of his neck and down there. Okay, he's got some really great shadows that kind of come off the glasses and kind of go back to the edge of his skull that kind of emphasize that bald, beautiful bald head. Okay, again, you can use, if you're using a pencil, you can do that a little bit more delicately. I'm going to shade in the jaw here, so he's pretty dark right down in here. And then this line, if you can get it to be nice and subtle right here where it's like the edge of the jaw, so it needs to be darker right on the edge, but then if you can shade it out so that it's a little bit lighter down below and up above, that'll kind of define that jawline a little bit better. And then he's got like a muscle coming down here. Finding the shapes of the shadows is really going to start to add more character. So it's really all about drawing what you see. And putting all of those shapes into the right context. I'm just gonna loosely define his shirt here because I'm not super worried about it. I just want it to kind of hold his neck. I think we might have actually got his neck a little on the long side if you look here, because my drawing, yeah, see, I think I should have had the shirt right about there, and the neck probably should have stopped right about there. That is okay. It's not going to, if you have a pencil, you can erase this and kind of go back, but it's not really going to affect the charm of the drawing so much. And a lot of times, if this is just practice, just keep going, because every time you are working towards something or working on something, you're getting better. And that's the point of this, is to get better. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. Actually, no, I'm gonna start to put in a little bit of reflection in these glasses. So he's got kind of a spot that goes like this. It's a little darker. And then this is kind of darker. And then this part right here is pretty white, so we'll just kind of change the direction of our lines to suggest some shadow in there. Okay, I think we'll stop there. I think that if you guys want to keep moving on this, adding more shadow and detail, go for it. You could pull in some colored pencils, some watercolor, but this is just a really good exercise on getting the proportions of the face right and starting to work towards drawings that are more realistic. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.